Hello everyone, welcome to the December edition of the 2019 All Bugs Good and Bad webinar series. Today we have Mark Pavlosky Jr. of MPJ Wildlife Consulting, and he will talk about the successful project at Hitchcock Woods, one of the largest urban forests in the United States. He will be speaking on the reintroduction of the red-cockaded woodpecker.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm excited today to share this reintroduction project we've done at Hitchcock Woods to reintroduce the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. This project has been ongoing for probably about 6 years at this point, but there were many before I came here that believed once the red-cockaded woodpecker could be back in Hitchcock Woods. And so first I'd like to make some acknowledgements first, maybe. First I'd like to acknowledge my family. Without their support, we could not have started this project and kept it going. It's kind of been great to see this project grow as my daughters have grown and to go out and band with them. But of course, we need to thank the Hitchcock Woods Foundation for supporting this idea and giving me the opportunity to bring an endangered species back to their property. And our partners, the Longleaf Alliance, we'll talk about them and the project that we got involved in to make this all happen. Of course, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, the biologist Carolyn Causey. She has been a huge help getting us into safe harbor and guiding us through this process, along with the Fish and Wildlife Service, our recovery coordinator, Wilma Dearman. Also, our local neighbors would be the Savannah River Forest Service. Tal Mims and Ray Russo have helped us out tremendously with support. And also our donor population, the Francis Marion National Forest outside of Charleston. And none of this could have happened, again, without Ralph Costa, whose vision of translocation many, many, many years ago has led us to this point of really helping the recovery efforts of the red-cockaded woodpecker. And then the boots on the ground for our donor population, Mr. Larry Wood with Wildlife Investigations. He's out there finding our birds so that we could bring them here and help recover this extirpated population. And lastly, we've got University of South Carolina Aiken, which we're going to continue this project into the future with their help and some of their students in biology classes enrolled in their biology program. So we'll talk about the red-cockaded woodpecker for the next hour probably. This bird is about the size of a robin. You can see it here in the hand. It's black and white. Its very distinctive white cheek patch separates it from its similar cousins, the downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker. And what's also different, this woodpecker, the red-cockaded woodpecker, or you'll hear me refer to it a lot as the RCW, has that red cockade, and only the males have this cockade. If you can see it on right here. Other than that, males and adult male and females look identical. Later, we'll talk about some juveniles when we start to look at them in the cavity. Their habitat is the longleaf pine ecosystem, or the southern pine ecosystem. And they're extremely dependent on their cavity trees. And what makes this bird special or very interesting is that they are a cooperative breeder. And so they live in a family group, a breeding pair, helpers, which are the offspring from previous year. These helpers stick around and help the breeding pair maintain cavities, defend cavity trees, brood, or help with the raising of the brood, incubating and feeding, and then even feeding the fledglings when they come out. So this group dynamic is what sets this woodpecker apart from similar species or other woodpeckers in our region. The longleaf pine ecosystem is a fire-dependent ecosystem. And so fire helps keep this landscape in check. And when I say in check, I mean the understory and the mid-story, from reaching levels that would make the habitat unsuitable for the red-cockaded woodpecker. So you can see in some of the pictures here on the side, this open landscape with tall, large pines that's ideal for the red-cockaded woodpecker. These pine trees that they depend on, one for foraging and two for nesting, produce a lot of resin or sap. And this sap is used by the woodpeckers to help as a defense mechanism for the cavities. They'll create resin wells and allow the tree to basically bleed and help defend against snakes or flying squirrels. Again, more images of the longleaf pine habitat. These are all images of Hitchcock Woods, which we will be talking about. These pine trees are important, like I said, not only for foraging, but mainly for the cavity. Their whole entire life depends or circles around this cavity or a group of cavity trees. Excuse me. These cavity trees are the limiting factor for their recovery. And so in the early 1970s, they were put on the endangered species list because of loss of habitat. The longleaf pine ecosystem once ranged from southern Virginia all the way down along the coast, and he even reaches out into western Texas. Because of inappropriate silviculture, fire suppression, urbanization, and agricultural practices, it's estimated that only at one time 3% of the original range of longleaf pine remained. And so there was a huge effort, there has been recently a huge effort to restore this longleaf pine ecosystem. And by doing so, we are now creating new habitat for the red-cockaded woodpecker, which has responded great in leaps and bounds with all the management that goes on with the red-cockaded woodpecker. The next we'll start talking about where Hitchcock Woods is. And sorry for this very grainy aerial photography, but Hitchcock Woods is in the western part of South Carolina, really close to the Savannah River, which is right along here. We'll zoom in a little bit more. You can see here we are located right here between Augusta, Georgia and Columbia, South Carolina. And you'll see Hitchcock Woods is nestled right in the heart of Aiken, which makes it our largest urban forest, privately owned urban forest in the country. And zooming in a little bit more, you can start to see how just from the imagery, the available types of habitat out there. We have two main drainages that run through the property and we have some very unique topography in the Sandhill region. So a quick history about Hitchcock Woods. In the early 1900s, the Hitchcocks purchased the land. Aiken, South Carolina was a winter colony that focused around the equestrian activities. So the Hitchcock Woods, big into the equestrian life, used Hitchcock, what they called Aiken Woods at the time, for riding. So this land has been preserved. It was originally about 8,000 acres. And in 1939, the Hitchcock Woods Foundation was created to preserve the remaining 1,100 acres. So that original tract of land started to be bought off or sold off and developed. And so the Hitchcocks made a donation to the city of Aiken, or the people of Aiken, for that original 1,100 acres or 1,200 acres. During this time of just riding and just weren't really mainly doing trail maintenance, there wasn't much focus on the woods itself. A lot of fire suppression throughout the history of Hitchcock Woods resulted in the extirpation of a small RCW population that once occurred in Hitchcock Woods. And so about the mid 1980s, there was a shift in management where they started to recognize the benefits of managing the woods, as well as, excuse me, as well as they had a management plan created that gave them the framework of how to properly manage for the woods. So armed with this framework, they set out and started to restore this longleaf pine ecosystem that had just got a little bit out of balance, a little bit unchecked because of lack of management, and fire suppression. So then 2013 comes around, I moved to Aiken, South Carolina. I meet Randy Wilcott, a trustee on the board for the foundation, and he had this vision many years ago when he first moved of the woodpeckers returning to Hitchcock Woods. He saw the resource that they had and the improvements that they were making on the landscape and asked the question, how do we get them back? So when we met up in 2013, we got the ball rolling. And so we'll talk a little bit more about their management. So they opened up parcels or stands with small machinery, which we can select small pieces of fuel and remove them from the landscape and leaving our larger pines. We're then opening up the land, the canopy and allowing sunlight to come back in, and we're seeing some really good regeneration in stands on Hitchcock Woods that have been suppressed for many, many years. And following that up, we then selectively have removed timber. And this has gone on for the last 20 years in small, little isolated pockets throughout the woods. And then next, to cap it all off, what makes this a really interesting property is, since we're right in the middle of the forest, we have that wildland-urban interface. And our ability to use fire in this wildland-urban interface has made this recovery and restoration process happen. Without the ability to use the fire, mechanical treatment could only get us so far. I believe that since they have been able to prescribe burn over the last 20 plus years, the habitat was prime for this successful project that we're about to talk about. So this is our fire team. It's made up of experience levels from novice to an expert. Individuals in these pictures have worked on fires on a fire crew for 20 plus years. Some are the first time they've ever walked onto a fire line. We love to use fire at Hitchcock Woods, or prescribed fire at Hitchcock Woods, as a learning tool, not only for our crew members and to build a crew, but to have the public come out and see the activities that are going on, and that good fires are good for the landscape. And when I mean good for the landscape, on the left, we see a dormant season prescribed fire in December, and on the right, how quickly it responds 3 months later, same hillside. So this fire, like I said, or this landscape is fire dependent, and has adapted to respond to disturbance at this level. Because we were making such progress with prescribed fire and the Hitchcock Woods folks, Bennett Tucker and his predecessor have done amazing work. Because they were making such good progress, myself and others recognized the potential to support RCWs. And so we started asking the question, well, how close are the RCWs to us? And again, we'll zoom out, and to the south, we've got Savannah River site, whose population has grown from a few birds in the mid 80s to well over a couple hundred birds at this point. And then Fort Gordon on the other side of Augusta, which is about 30 miles. Sorry, Savannah River site is about 13 miles to our south. And then we started asking, well, how are the birds doing in the state? And so these were numbers reported last year by Caroline Causey. But at the time when we thought about this, they were probably not very far off. They might not have been this high, but not very far. But you can see in South Carolina, the RCWs are doing fantastic. We're second in the entire range, with number of clusters right behind Florida, which have some of the largest populations, like the Apalachicola and the Pavlosky is huge. So when I met with Randy Wilcott, we said, what happens if a bird, or he asked me, what happens if an endangered woodpecker shows up on our property? What do we have to do now? So there were, of course, we all know, or most of us know about take, instances of take with an endangered species. So there's this program called a safe harbor program, and it's used in multiple states for many species, endangered species. And it's a program that allows private landowners to work with state and federal agencies to come up with a plan to manage take if there needs to be a take. And by take, I mean removal of a cavity for development. Because it's an endangered species, you're supposed to provide habitat for that individual or that group. Well, the safe harbor allows us some flexibility depending on what our initial baseline is. So I was contracted by Hitchcock Woods to do the initial baseline survey and search for any evidence of RCWs at the time. And this was 2014. And so I walked the whole property, transect spaced 50 meters apart. I feel like I saw every tree in that place, but we're still finding finding old relic cavity trees once we open up little smaller isolated pockets of older growth that have been left over time. So as you can see here, I identified with the triangles some old relic cavity trees that were once used by RCWs, probably back in the 70s. I think there was a report I found that the last sighting of an RCW was in 79, maybe 80, 81. But after that, no one remembers seeing them or hearing them until a couple of years. So after identifying these locations, I worked with Ann Kaiser, a trustee on the board, the Hitchcock Woods Foundation board, who is a retired forester from the U.S. Forest Service. And she did the stand measurements, measured all the trees, and I ran the foraging habitat analysis as it relates to the red-cockaded woodpecker. And what we were looking at for areas within the woods that identified had potential relic cavity trees, 2 that had potential suitable habitat, and then we followed it up with the measurements. And so the recovery plan says that the habitat for the red-cockaded woodpecker in acceptable range is a basal area of about 40. And a basal area is, if you think of a tree, cut it down at breast height, and you look at the area of that cut and add all the trees up, and that gets you basically at your basal area. And so the recovery standard said, or recovery guidelines said 40, and as we all know, they don't read the book. They can't read this manual that says they're supposed to stay right there at 40. We've seen instances where they use areas and do quite well with basal areas around 20. So we were able to adjust these measurements and down to at least 35, which gave us enough room to identify 9 potential locations, 9 potential locations for recruitment clusters. And a recruitment cluster is a site where we've identified 4 trees, install an artificial cavity, and then hope that they show up. And so at this time in our project of going through the baseline, getting enrolled in safe harbor, we were just going to build 9 locations, put cavities out there, and hope that we can attract or retain a dispersing RCW from one of those neighboring populations. Well, it just so happened at the time we were about to install the cavities, we found out about a program or an initiative or a program that the Longleaf Alliance was doing to move woodpeckers from the Francis Marion National Forest, which is a recovered population, to private lands. And so we were able to get involved in that. And you can see here, Francis Marion's all the way on the coast, and we're all the way in the Savannah River corridor. So we were fortunate enough to get involved into that. And now we're one of 11 or 12 properties, 10 of them being private properties throughout the state that are part of this program that are helping restore or to establish new populations or to help struggling populations on private lands. So it's a really cool program that we're getting the landowner excited about having endangered species on his land and doing what's right for their land. So now that we were going to receive birds, we needed to put in a place for them to go. So around the time of Hurricane Hugo in the mid-'80s that hit right outside of Charleston at Francis Marion National Forest, this method was basically developed and perfected, and we can now install artificial cavities, which would, if I only wish I was this fast, in about 20 to 30 minutes, and we can do this across the landscape very quickly. The RCW will take anywhere from 6 months to 6 years to build a cavity. So this is a quick way for us to get in, one, after a disturbance like a hurricane, or to help our populations just grow in general, is by providing cavities for them in this method. So I get to climb up in the trees, cut out holes, and put in an artificial box for them. So when we talk translocation, I always get this question of how we capture the birds and we move the birds. So fortunately, the RCW nests in a hole every single night. It goes pretty much to the same nest or same cavity every night. Only one individual roosts in that cavity. And so Larry Wood on the Francis Marion followed these birds around throughout the year, monitored them from eggs all the way to juveniles. We then were given locations where to go and catch these birds. Pretty soon you'll see we wait till they go in, we sneak up with a net, and we allow the bird to just jump into the net. We then put it in a box and drive it wherever the recipient population is. And this is a process that goes on all over the region. There's a huge program called the Southern Range Translocation Cooperative, and we move well over 30 birds every year. So once we get to the property, we climb up in the dark. Usually it's really late. For us, it's a 2.5 hour drive from our donor population. So we get the birds out and we put them back into a cavity. And then we screen it up. We screen them up and let them in there all night long. That way they kind of get acclimated to the area, and there's a string attached to the screen that we pull off in the morning at sunrise. There we go. And we get to release the birds. So we went from instantly having 0 birds on Hitchcock Woods to the next morning having 10 woodpeckers, 10 endangered species on the landscape. And so these are the locations of the initial 5 pair that we released. And what's great about Hitchcock Woods is that we get the opportunity to not only bring out our board members and basically anybody from the public that's interested in this project, we welcome them to come out. And so we've had every age group out pulling strings, releasing birds, watching this process happen. So then we go, and that was, sorry, let me back up. That was 2016. The fall of 2016 was our initial release. Next, we moved to the 2017 breeding season. And fortunate for us, 8 of our birds stayed. This was a great result. So a typical translocation averaged about 40, maybe 50% retention. Our first breeding season, 4 months after the release, we had 8 birds stay. It was great news. We were so excited. And then it got even more exciting when these birds, for the first time, nested in Hitchcock Woods. Well over 30 years since the first RCWs hatched in Hitchcock Woods. So what we do now is we monitor their success. And we do this range-wide. All RCW biologists do this. We get to run around all summer long with a wireless video probe that we can raise up into the cavity and see what's going on. And so the RCW has a very easy nesting period to follow. Once the first egg is laid, they lay 1 egg per day, usually stopping at about 4. Once that last egg is laid, we wait 12 days and we come back and we check for their hatch. And at that point, then we determine their age based on the feather tracks in their development. So on their tail, along their back, and their wings, and their head. Then we look at the color of their bill, and as well as their feet and legs. And once we we determine their age, we come back at day 7. We come back at day 7, and when we remove these nestlings, and we put color bands on their legs so they can be identified as individuals. And so we use a basic noose. It's a thick fishing line that goes through just a piece of surgical tubing. We lower it gently into the cavity, slowly pull it till we feel it tight, and then we gently guide the nestlings out. I'm gonna skip around. This is quite a long video, so I don't think I have control. But here we'll go through the process of banding. So it's a lot of fun. We get the public out, like I said, again for this. We let them watch and be a part of this program. And that has just helped. I mean, we haven't heard a single negative thing about bringing the woodpeckers back from anybody. They absolutely love this project. And so we then take basic weights. We'll skip ahead to where we start to put some bands on their legs. They get 3 color bands on one leg and a single color and an aluminum band on the other leg. And this identifies them as individuals, so we can track them over time. We can monitor a project monitor the success of a project such as this. So we just slip these bands over their leg. They're free, they're loose. Actually, as their leg develops, it'll start to harden. So those bands will be able to even rotate a little bit even freer at that point. And that's basically it. So it's not very, I mean, it is difficult, especially when you're hanging 30 feet in the tree. But it's very easy. The birds don't even realize it. I think it's like they wear it as a badge of honor, because even the adults will have them, hopefully, in a monitored population. And so we return them to the cavity. And then about day 17 to 22 days old, we come back and we check for, we do what we call a late stage sex check. And as you can see, some individuals in the cavities have a red dot on their head, or a red crown patch, and that indicates a male. So juvenile males at this age, before their first molt, will have a red crown patch. Juvenile females look exactly like juvenile adults, all black and white, no red at all. And so what we do is we try to get the peeper into the cavity while they're in there and try to match up color bands. So if you see, they'll shift around, you can see, okay, that blue one on the right is a male. And so we can get our sex ratio in the cavity before they fledge. So in that very first year, like I said, it was not only exciting that we retained birds, but we also had 3 pair that attempted nesting. 2 pair were successful. We banded 3 nestlings in that first year, and we fledged 2 of them. Like I said, we didn't even expect this to happen in our first year. Typically with translocated birds, especially juvenile birds, they are very successful at nesting in that initial year. At about the same time we started a project, there was another property close to us called Aiken Gopher Tortoise that had the same idea. We have the property, we have the landscape or the available habitat, let's just build it and see if they come. So they did that. Aiken Gopher Tortoise sits on the eastern side of the county. Sure enough, a bird from Savannah Riverside showed up. And to our surprise, at the end of the 2017 breeding season, a female from Savannah Riverside showed up at Hitchcock Woods, 13 miles away. So retention of that dispersing individual, I believe, can be accredited to the habitat management and the fact that we actually had birds on the landscape. There's no telling how many woodpeckers crossed through Hitchcock Woods over the last 20 years and didn't stay, one, because the habitat was not suitable or there were no available cavities. Because of our program, or because of their management in our program, we now have the ability to help dispersing individuals from their natal cluster sites as they are dispersing throughout the landscape. So our translocation was not just a single year of translocation. The whole project was a 4-year of translocation. In 2017, we got another 10 birds and we moved them to these 5 orange locations. So essentially we stacked the property full. We just put a bird in every or a pair of birds in every available cavity. We had one single bird remain. He lost his female, and that female from Savannah Riverside, the female from Savannah Riverside, she started here and then eventually displaced the female at this cluster and joined the male here. So again, we moved 10 more birds. We had another great year of retention. We now had 2 more clusters become active, or 3 more clusters become active. One had a pair and we had 2 single males. And so pre-breeding season, I go out and I'm trying to identify what birds we have. And while I'm out doing these initial group composition surveys for the breeding season, I continuously pick up 1 or 2 birds over in this area. 1 bird consistently, a male, was just constantly over here. And if you remember from the previous, here we go. If you remember, this was kind of deemed not suitable, right? It's under that 40. In fact, this stand, and this stand, they're right under 20, about 18 basal area. So according to the book, they're not supposed to be there. Well, I talked to the recovery coordinator, and sure enough, because of our great success, he was willing to allow us to put in 2 more additional recruitment sites. I did this the first week of February. 2 weeks later, I come back and one of them is active. So going into the 2018 breeding season, we now have 6 potential breeding pair and 2 single males on the landscape. Another great success is the breeding season we had. This year, in 2018, we banded 12 nestlings at 5 of the sites. Cluster 7 did attempt nestling, but it just was never successful. I don't know what it is about the Savannah Riverside bird, or that male from Francis Marion, but something's not working out for the 2 of them. They have, and we'll see it again in 19, they attempted, but they weren't successful. So we banded 12, we fledged 8 that year. It was a really good year. We come into the 2018 fall. This year we have 8 available birds to us, and we move 4 pair to these orange locations. Again, stuffing the property full. Ralph Costa, the guy that believes strongly in this translocation effort, always said the science says the more birds you can move, or more individuals of a given species you can move at any time, you'll have a greater success rate of retention and prolonged inhabitants. So we then go into our breeding season and we've got even more activity all around us. So it looks like now here Hitchcock Woods is right in the middle of all this RCW movement. I didn't draw arrows, so we'll use the pointer, but a bird from Fort Gordon found its way up to the Sumter National Forest, and this is in the beginning of 2018. Sorry, the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, sometime it moved up there. A bird that we moved in 2018 found its way up to Stable View, which is another safe harbor property just north of Hitchcock Woods along the I-20 corridor. A small property with beautiful pine habitat, and a bird that we moved from Francis Marion to Hitchcock Woods, dispersed, and found its way there. So we are in this kind of, and at the same time, another bird from Savannah River Site went to Aiken Gopher Tortoise, and I believe, I'm almost 100% positive that a bird from Savannah River Site found its way up to Sumter. So we've got birds moving around this area, and we're right in the middle. So we went into our breeding season this summer with the most birds we have ever seen on the property, and it was a crazy breeding season. There were birds everywhere all the time. We're retaining juveniles as helpers. Our group size is fantastic. Almost every group has 1 or 2 helpers, which is just a sign of a healthy population or a healthy breeding pair. So going into the 2019 breeding season, we had just about everything full. We had some competition going on in this 5 and 6 for a while between the single male and this pair, but everything developed great, and we had 14 nestlings banded this summer in our 4th year of this project, and all 14 made it onto the landscape. Excuse me. We had 6 males and 8 females. This year it was a little more skewed to the females, which is exactly what we want. We want them to move around and help us fill these other vacancies, because typically the helpers that stay are generally males that stay and help the adults. So we like to see those females that are going to be dispersing, and we want them to move around. And while we want them to stay, we also want them to go help out other populations nearby. I kind of see Hitchcock Woods as a stepping stone. Not only its own, hopefully, little population, but a stepping stone to all these other populations. And then we just recently did our 4th and final, hopefully final translocation. Our original goal was to have 9 active clusters after 4 years of translocation. So hopefully with this year, we will have some arrangement of 9 out of these 11 clusters. And I suspect it'll probably be above that here in the near future, either this year or next year. And kind of wrap things up, some totals. We have moved a total of 32 woodpeckers from the Francis Marion to Hitchcock Woods. 24 of them, our group size is about, like I said, 3.25 birds, which is amazing for a population of only 9 active clusters. Our total number of birds currently, we sit right at 31. And the number of birds banded or born on the property, it's almost just the amount that we translocated. And you can see down here at the bottom, our retention rate, it's always been about the 80, 70, 50%. This year's to be determined. We'll figure that out here in a couple weeks or in a couple months. But overall, we know the whereabouts of 50% of every single bird that we translocated. And to continue out into the future, while we're not necessarily going to have to do this intensive monitoring once we reach our goal of 9, we have a new kind of side project that we're developing with Dr. Ramstead from USC Aiken and Dr. James Garabedian from US Forest Service, Savannah River. And we're going to be looking at the space use and neighboring group interactions and how that works with the kinship relations. And so we're going to be we have taken DNA samples from every single bird on our population, which is kind of unique that we're going to be able to put together an entire pedigree for our population. And what we're going to try to do is predict that level of relatedness and interactions and fitness. Long story short. But so, yes, that does hurt. It did not feel good. But that's the future of our project, and is just to maintain these woodpeckers for as long as they're here, and to not let them vanish again. And so with that, I'll take questions.
Wow, thank you. That was awesome. And there's been a couple of comments in the question and answer box about the footage that you were able to show. And they really enjoyed that. And let's see, let me look over here in the chat box. Y'all go ahead and type a question if y'all have one. I know there was one earlier.
Mark, this is Tim. There was a there was a good question about parasitism from cuckoos or anything like that. Are the red-cockaded woodpeckers susceptible to that?
Any questions?
Hey, Mark, did you just hear Tim's question? Hey, Mark, are you still there?
Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. Hello? Now, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I one of my videos in the presentation distracted me, and I guess I hit the mute button. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Tim had a question for you from one of the chatters.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the people asked if the nests are parasitized by cuckoos or other birds like that.
We don't see too many cuckoos. What we do see is parasitism with bluebirds. We'll sometimes use the cavities, nuthatches, chickadees, smaller cavity nesting birds like that. But we will have pileated woodpeckers or even some red-bellied woodpeckers destroy the cavity. So if you see in the bottom right, one of the artificial cavities, we use that PVC to kind of restrict, and the expanded metal to kind of restrict them from blowing out the cavity. But one of our main cavity competitors is the southern flying squirrel. They would take over our cavities quite frequently and disrupt nesting quite a bit.
We saw the same thing. I was doing some fire ant research with bluebirds, and raccoons and squirrels were some of the main predators, more so than the insects that people were worried about.
See, we got a couple of other questions, and one of them is a kind of a statement. It says that is an impressive ladder. How long does it take to attach that to the tree?
Well, you get pretty quick at it, and I always get that question, so I added this in here. I forgot to hit it, but that is our ladders that we use are 10-foot ladder sections, and that's 6 of them. So that cavity that I'm going to up there is about 59 feet. It's just the quickest and easiest way to get up and down a tree. Some people use climbing tree stands, but it really, I can climb 20 feet, 2 ladders in about 30 seconds. I just lean against a tree and you strap it with a chain, and then your body weight and your safety harness keep you on the tree.
Wow.
Somebody also asked about the impacts of bark beetle pests. Are the birds impacting, or have you guys, has anybody looked at how the birds impact bark beetle pests or other insect pests in the woods?
I am not positive on that exact answer, but I do know that when we have a lightning struck tree, or there is an area where maybe a prescribed fire or wildfire got too intense, and there is a lot of dead trees, and we do see the birds using those areas that are infested with those trees and dying trees. A project I did for 2 years before this, or while this was getting going, when we followed those birds around the landscape for 4 to 8 hours every single day for 2 years, and we noticed that they would go to those infested trees quite frequently in their daily routine.
And then the other question was about, are there any specific height requirements for their nests? Like a bluebird, you know, they normally want a certain height.
There is not. The birds will make their own cavities at wherever they can find the easiest place to get into the tree. But typically, for ease of management, and we tend to only use 2 ladder sections when we install a cavity. So that's just easier. If someone comes in behind me a year or 2 later, they can use 2 ladders and get exactly to that height and not have to worry about that falling in between. So no, there is no standard or requirement, but we all kind of just do it at 20 feet. Some people like to do it 30, but we also just kind of look at, you know, if we're putting in cavities, in an existing cluster, and we see all the natural cavities are created at 30 or so feet, and we'll do that. It's just kind of based on the tree itself.
Anyone else have a question? There's been a lot of chat about your slides and how informative this was. And I agree, this was a wonderful presentation. Candy's asking, do these woodpeckers have natural predators that threaten them?
They're natural predators and the time that they're most vulnerable will be in the cavity as juveniles. So their main predator would be like a rat snake, or like I said, the flying squirrels will also get in there and disrupt nestlings and eggs. As adults, they're always watching out for large predators, always watching out for hawks. And so that's why they tend to wait to come out of their cavity when it's nice and bright and safe, so no owls are hanging out. And they always try to go in a little early too, I guess, before the owls start to wake up. So, but those would be the main predators. And like I said, mainly it's in the nest.
This is got one more question here about burns. It's asking if summer burns provide a different suite of bugs versus winter burns.
Winter burns or birds?
It says burns. So I think what they're asking is, if you burn during the summer, does that change the insect fauna versus if you burn during the winter?
I'm not an entomologist, but I would say that when we do growing season prescribed burning, the number of flying insects that are attracted to that smoke while it's still smoking is a lot more than when we do our dormant season burn. But I'm not positive on the numbers or species.
Yeah, as an entomologist, I'd be pretty surprised if you saw a difference in actual populations before or after burn, because most of the animals and plant life in a burn ecology are very well adapted to that. So you don't usually see huge differences. You have few things die from that, but throughout these you don't see huge changes in populations based on burn if it's a burn ecology.
And it looks like we've had a question about woodpeckers in general pecking at concrete. Is this normal?
I see that comment. I don't know. I watch a lot of. I don't know. I don't think that's normal.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen. We do get in the extension offices. We do get questions about woodpeckers attacking, houses and things like that. And it's usually wood siding. I haven't seen anything about concrete in particular.
Well, guys, it looks like all the questions have been answered. And first of all, thank you so much for coming and being with us today. We have thoroughly enjoyed this talk. And I think everyone else has too, judging from the comments. So we appreciate it very much. There have been a lot of questions about the 2020 webinars, which will be announced soon. And how will you know? I will gladly send out all 700 registrants from this year an email if you would like to, when it's time and you would like to register for next year. So with that, Mark, again, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been great. All you guys have a great holiday season, and we will see you in 2020.